Good morning, everyone. I know there's a couple of folks online. We're a very small, intimate group in the room, and so we're going to do our very best to maintain use of the microphones so that people online can hear us. And we encourage you to participate to the extent that you can. You can use the chat function, and we'll add your comments to the comments that are ongoing, and certainly you can ask questions as well. This session is called Hat Trick: Increasing Health, Saving Money, and Reducing Carbon in Unregulated Rentals. I think it's telling that there's a very small number of folks in the room. This is often a type of housing that is very difficult to serve and therefore gets ignored by a lot of programs. So we're here today sharing a little bit about what we have discovered in our time with working with communities and trying to get at equitable electrification, but really just how are people able to pay their electric bills in addition to their housing costs without any kind of displacement risk. So it's a tricky wicket, as one might say. So my name is Faith Graham. I'm with Elevate Energy. We are an organization based in Chicago, but we've been here in Portland for a number of years, I think five years. I'm fairly new to Elevate, but have been working with Elevate as somebody who needed their services for about 10 years. So I'm happy to be on board. I think we should just all go around. How's that? Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, hi everyone. My name is Muhannad An-Najjar, and I work with an organization, a community-based organization called Unite Oregon. I have been working with this organization for about 2.5 years now. My main role has been over this period as a manager of the Southwest Corridor Equity Coalition. So from the name, you can say like it's focused on a specific geography, but we have been dealing with or working on ensuring equity in that area or equitable development. The area was expecting a light rail project to come there. So you can expect like all the other complexities that comes with investment of this size or this nature. One of the biggest issues that we have been thinking or talking about, which we were not able to solve, or we have not actually solved yet, is the unregulated affordable housing, and there's like a lot of them in that geography. And so I will be probably sharing some of what we have been hearing from community, some of the challenges that we have been experiencing in this session. I would like to also say that I am also here because I'm a member of the DEI coalition that supports and helps the Oregon Multifamily Energy Program, or better known as ORMAP, that is operated by TRC and funded, I would say, by OHCS or through OHCS to do some energy efficiency upgrades for multifamily homes. So yeah, I think that's about me, and looking forward to talking more.
Yeah, I'm Patrick Foley, also with Elevate with Faith. I'm the senior energy engineer for the Pacific Northwest. So I've been in Oregon for about 5 years since we started the office here. And my main job is the analysis and, managing the upgrades in the properties we work with. So I've been, in and out of the common areas, attics, basements of a lot of these unregulated affordable housing properties. So I've just seen, a lot of different things in those assessments, and looking forward to kind of sharing today.
Yeah.
My name is Eli Booth. I am a graduate student at Portland State University in the Masters of Real Estate, and just interested in affordable housing and obviously energy efficiency as well is big to me. So I look forward to observing and learning lots.
I'm Tim Davis, Washington County Office of Community Development. 7 years ago, I started running the wood stove exchange program, where we take out old uncertified polluting wood stoves and put in new cleaner devices. And in the last couple of years, we've expanded into the Energy Trust Community Partner Funding Program, which has increased incentives for new devices, insulation. So we're doing intake for those types of houses. And then a big proponent of the recent Oregon Department of Energy heat pump incentive programs. The renter program has been out for a couple of months. The owner program may be out here very quickly. And like Patrick, I've been in probably a few thousand crawl spaces and attics and seen a lot and learned a lot and able to assist people in many different ways. So.
My name is Amanda Zuniga. I work at Energy Trust of Oregon. I work in the commercial sector as a senior project manager. Last year we launched community cooling. We call it landlord provided cooling spaces, which is in response to Senate Bill 1536. So we're providing up to full cost equipment rebates for landlords who have on-site or off-site spaces for their tenants to go when it's really hot outside. Also, we found that so learning a lot through that around how folks want hardwired solutions instead of portable ACs, how folks who even have units in their homes still want a community space. The cost of running cooling is just skyrocketing. A lot of my work is focused in multifamily, and community partner funding is a big part of that. Happy to be here.
So my name is Sepide Razania. I'm with Unruh Solutions, and I'm really excited to learn about this challenge and finding some tricks for you guys. So I also work with the DEI Coalition as a facilitator, so I work with Mohamed quite a bit. I don't know if we could get people on the line to do that.
Is there anyone online that would like to introduce themselves? You might have to read them in, but okay. So I'm going to ask them if they want to introduce themselves to go ahead and put it in the chat, please, everyone online, and we'll announce you in the room and try to include you as best we possibly can. Thank you. I should have also said that Elevate does the implementation work in unregulated. So our focus is all on affordable housing and energy efficiency. There are some programs that are doing small commercial spaces and daycare, but really in the Northwest, we're really focused on affordable housing, and that has been both the regulated side and the unregulated. There are not a lot of programs throughout the country doing kind of this unregulated housing, but we've been doing it in several places and launching programs in Washington and Oregon to do the same. And we are also with Sepida and Mohanad, not particularly, we're not on the DEI committee, but we are working with TRC to deliver technical assistance to the Oregon multifamily energy programs unregulated housing. So what is this thing, right? And if somebody online introduces themselves, will you just shout out and interrupt us? Oh, perfect. Thank you. That's great. Thanks. So let's go ahead and jump in. Please join us. Sorry, we're just getting started. So it's a very small group. You're welcome. No, no, not at all. So we thought one of the things we were going to do if this was a broader room, but I think we should still do it. We could go around popcorn, whoever wants to, is sometimes it's hard to imagine what we're talking about. So we're talking about multifamily properties, apartment buildings, and this is somewhere, and we'll get into definitions, but essentially it's apartments that are not subsidized by the federal or state government to maintain affordable rents. And yet they're places where people who have low incomes live. So I wanted us just to kind of visualize, imagine, what is this housing? Where is it? What does it look like in your neighborhood? So you might think about those people that made your life possible today. Teachers or daycare providers or professors or baristas or bus drivers. Some of us, like, where do they live? And can you imagine that in your community? And do you have a visualization of that? And does anybody want to jump in and describe what they think that looks like in their neighborhood?
Oh, I don't mind at all. I love the microphone. Don't give it to me too much. Paula Brown. I'm a member of the DEI Coalition for ORMAP, and I'm glad to be here with some of my team members. But in my small town of Oak Ridge, Oregon, West Fur, the houses that people live in that are not affordable are often moldy and drafty. And if the plumbing's not working, there's issues. So, and my home has been an affordable living space for some people because I'm dedicated to providing it when I can.
I was actually going to mention, so there's an apartment building fairly close to here on like Weidler and 8th. And I lived there for about a year. It's like 3 stories tall, kind of an old courtyard building built in like 1929. It was a really affordable place for me to live for a while because, you know, I had kind of nice finishes. It was a turn of the century apartment with hardwoods and, you know, nice sconces and stuff. And the rent was only like $1,200. And, you know, it's not regulated. It's not like, you know, affordable regulated housing, but it was an affordable place to live for a while. And another thing that made it like deeply affordable for the people living there is they had a central steam heating system, which like is pretty rare to see in the Northwest in general. And because it was a central system, like the tenants didn't have any gas bills. So, you know, that really like locked in the consistency of my utility rates throughout the year. That being said, it was an old building built in 1929, has some infrastructure issues, doesn't have the best wiring, doesn't have the best plumbing. You know, you had some pest issues. And I wasn't, you know, suffering from the gas bill, but it has an ancient steam heating system that like somebody's paying for and is creating a lot of emissions. So there were definitely a lot of opportunities there for improvement. Yeah.
Anybody else have a vision that they want to share?
This made me think of the, I guess, similar kind of split incentive challenges. So this is a long time ago, but during the time, like during my student life, when I was living in, you know, affordable housing, unregulated, it was interesting because most of the heating was central, and electricity was covered in the rent. And so I did notice that there were a lot of people who had like windows wide open in winter with like blasting heaters. So it's interesting that you could think of it as both ways, as when it's owned by the renters and the landlord doesn't do the upgrade and vice versa, right? So it's an interesting, I guess, dilemma both ways.
I just have one story. I used to work at the Energy Trust as well, and there was a development in one of the suburbs. It was 24-unit building, so 80 units. We were discussing putting ductless heat pumps in instead of the electric resistance heat. They were 2-story units, so and they didn't allow window air conditioners on the second floor. So the vacancy rate was actually pretty high when summer came along after the first lease was up. Talked to the owner, said, you know, we think your vacancy rate may go down if you did this. He just didn't want to take on the cost. I understood. Then his daughter moved into one of the units. Mentioned how high her bill was. He put a ductless heat pump in her unit, and she mentioned how comfortable it was. You know, her bills went down, and then we ended up putting 79 units in the rest of the unit. But again, you know, also with the Energy Trust, we would go out at times and do energy efficient installs, water saving resources. And you know, we saw housing situations that I think we're all kind of hoping to fix here. So to the extent that my kids would say, "Are you okay, Dad?" when I got home. So that's why I'm here. So yeah.
I found that a really interesting story because, you know, for that owner, it really took that building that personal connection of the experience of living in that housing to understand the true benefits of these improvements.
Yeah, and his vacancy rate went from like 30% in the summer to like 6%.
Wow.
We checked in with him a year or two later. Yeah.
So we'd like to just share a little bit about what we've learned, but really then open it. I mean, we can ask questions or you guys insert anything you have to insert. There's a microphone over there. But we will share a little bit, but really what we were hoping the session could be was a joint workshop on figuring out how are we going to serve these buildings more effectively. Because there's a lot of barriers and a lot of opportunity, and we certainly don't know the answer. You know, we're trying different things, but the answer is going to come from communities and conversations like this. So, so what is unregulated housing? Like, what does that even mean? And often it's called naturally occurring affordable housing, or in some circles, unnaturally occurring affordable housing, right? Because there's really not much natural about it. Sometimes it's called unregulated or unsubsidized. It's basically just no money is going in to subsidize the rents or to lower the rents. Sometimes in some places it's called just small multifamily, because it's not the big buildings that are, you know, built with low-income housing tax credits, and it's basically anywhere. Please come on in. Sorry, we're a small group, but we'd love to make room for you. So if you have ideas on names, oh yeah.
Get cozy.
Oh, we're really all shifting for you. Yeah, yeah. Welcome. I think this is my copy. You don't need to drink that. If you have ideas on names for unregulated housing, we'd really love to find something different, because it doesn't speak to anyone what we call this stuff. So these are rental properties. So people that live there rent these properties, and they're affordable to people that have low incomes. That's what we're talking about. Rental properties that are affordable to people with low incomes. And affordable means that the housing cost, and that is generally both the rent and the utilities, are no more than 30% of that tenant's income. And in Multnomah County, that is $2,000 for a 2-bedroom. When we're talking about somebody that makes 80% of area median income, which is generally the target for these kind of programs. So that's the cutoff. So basically you can imagine for a two-bedroom program or 2-bedroom unit, you're talking about $2,000 a month rent. And of course that changes all throughout the country, but I just pulled Multnomah County's current number. And low income, so I just said low income generally means 80% of the area median income. And in Multnomah County, that's $63,200 for a single unit, for a single person household, and $90,240 for a 4-person household. Still pretty high. Any questions or comments on that stuff? No. Okay. Yeah.
One comment on that is, like, you know, sometimes people think about like the unregulated housing stock and they're like, well, there can't be that much of it out there because, you know, these developers and landlords are going to charge as much as they can for rent. But really, when you hear that like the rent limit for a 2-bedroom is like $2,000, I could go on the Craigslist apartment listings and find them one after the other, you know, set up a couple of filters and find these, you know, all over the county. They're definitely out there. So
yeah. So the last thing I just wanted to say is, where is this? Where's the housing? And essentially it's everywhere, right? It's 8 out of 10 low-income households live in this kind of housing. And in Portland alone, there's a current estimate of 43,000 units of low-income housing that is unregulated. So it's,
This is multifamily
and that's multifamily.
just multifamily.
That's just multifamily. Now, of course, the single family, NOAA doesn't necessarily mean just multifamily. The programs we're going to talk about today are all only focused on apartment buildings. But there's a lot of single family that's also rented to people who have low incomes, certainly. And I would just say that in rural areas outside of the urban corridors, the percentage is even higher, right? Because there's fewer subsidized units built in rural communities. And I think we're closer to 100% of those being this kind of housing stock. But I'm speculating now. So I wanted to turn it over to Mohana.
Thank you very much, Faith. And I think I'm going to be talking about like the two questions. One is who is living there in these unregulated low-income housing, and then the second question is why are these kind of units and properties critical for community or to community stability? So if we're talking about who is living there, generally, like that, the big general picture of that is people who have low to moderate income are the ones who are living in those unregulated affordable units. And then we can just like zoom in and try to see like categories of those low income.
Sorry.
All right, no,
Yeah,
that's
go for it.
fine. So like I said, low income people are generally the ones living in this type of buildings. And I think there isn't this like criteria, qualifying criteria. So it could be like some people who are not low income but living in those properties, but generally it's the low income people. More specifically, if you're talking, it's Black, Indigenous, people of color are actually more attracted or actually forced to go there because they have they face many other barriers if they want to go to other places. So these are like the type of people who live in those properties. Like going a little bit deeper or focused, immigrants and refugees, a lot of those families live in this kind of buildings. And then people with disabilities. And one tenants in these properties, I find like a theme of people living in communities. You'll see like, for example, especially when we're talking about like immigrants and refugees, you see like East African communities, and they're all living in one apartment complex or like two or three apartment complexes like in the same area. And that's a really big thing when we talk about like also how it's important for stability. We don't want to dismantle those communities. We don't want them to lose that connection that they have. So generally, this is how I could describe actually who's living in those properties. And moving to the why is this topic important and why those type of units are really critical for community stability? The number one point is that losing them, and they are like really tend to be lost to the market rate quite easily if the private owner just decides to sell, and then there could be redevelopment or the new owner will just like decide to increase their rents. So that could really lead quickly to a lot of people being homeless because they cannot afford rent in this area, or they can't move to other places. And if they were lucky and they can afford, they will just simply be displaced. And that displacement is not okay for community members to just like continue. And a lot of them actually have been already displaced from other areas. So the thing that I mentioned where my area of focus was like the Southwest Corridor, a lot of these communities, when we talk to them, they have been displaced from other parts of the city, like Northeast Portland or other places where they were just forced to move here. And their options are becoming very limited now. So if they're pushed out of this area, they have nowhere to go probably. And that causes a lot of stress and health issues. And again, we probably will be talking more about this of like why and how this actually like helping those properties like upgrade and become more efficient could actually lead to better health outcomes for those communities. And then also, again, like I said earlier, displacement means losing those connections with friends, relatives, and places as well. A very good example that I heard last year from like Southeast Portland, probably you know or you don't know, has two of the largest and oldest mosques in Portland. So we were talking to some community members and we're like, well, Metro and TriMet, they might bring that light rail project back, but if you are affected or your units need to be like are in the way of the light rail and they have plans to relocate you in other places, and they were like really angry about it and upset. We can't leave this area. I was like, but what if it's like a better place, a better neighborhood, a better apartment, a bigger apartment? And they were like, we don't care. We are connected to this area. We are living next to the mosque. You can't just put me in Beaverton, for example, where I don't know anybody. I want to stay here. So that's why these properties are very important for us to maintain and make sure that people are staying where they are. And then these properties, like I also mentioned earlier, become very attractive to investors when this type of projects like investment in transit or infrastructure becomes available. A lot of investors, they just want to go and get them, and then they can do whatever they want, like rebuild them or just like charge higher rents for the tenants who are living there. And I think the final point I want to mention is uh, that a lot of these properties, and I think Paula, you mentioned something related to that, and also Patrick, about like a lot of them are old and they are really not in good condition. Honestly speaking, when I started to like hear the term NOAA and unregulated affordable housing, and it's owned by privately owned, I was like, wow, these people are really great. They're just keeping it affordable for people like without anybody forcing them. But then I realized, and of course, some of them are, we can't say like everybody is just, but I realized that a lot of these properties are kept at lower rates simply because their conditions are bad. The owners don't care to make the improvements, so they're just not charging a lot of money for rent. So that's a real issue that I think we need to address. And I believe like maybe this is a good transition to pass it to Patrick to talk to us about those upgrades and what the opportunities with them are and what conditions might be available or like are there for improving those properties. So.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction, Monan. So, being in and out of a lot of these properties for years, I do have a few things that I've kind of commonly seen. One of the biggest things you see is that, any incentive program that's approaching rental housing, one of the largest issues is this split incentive where, the owner doesn't get a direct payback on making energy efficiency improvements that reduce the tenant bills. It's really hard to, justify that cost savings back to the owner's bottom line. And it also, leads to, low investment in energy efficiency, but also maintenance beyond, doing a repaint at turnover. It's like, fine, we'll, tighten up some finishes, but I'm not going to do a window replacement at turnover. If the windows are fine, the windows are fine. So a lot of this housing stock has some real deferred maintenance issues. There is a huge variety in the housing stock as far as age, condition, size, construction type. It's really all different housing types built in, every single of the past, 7 decades. Another thing with the deferred maintenance is we run into a lot of health and safety issues that can sometimes prevent us from making deeper energy efficiency investments, because we don't want to put additional investment into something that's already unhealthy unless that unhealthy situation gets taken care of kind of first. And the way a lot of incentive programs are structured, they're strictly for the energy savings, and it can be really difficult to justify spending money on a health and safety issue if it's not leading directly to energy savings. So that's something we really have to figure out, how to approach that, how to bring additional funding to bear to address some of those health and safety issues before we're able to make these energy efficiency investments. There is kind of one thing specific to the Pacific Northwest housing that's often helpful is a lot of these places are already all electric because of the traditionally low electricity prices in the Pacific Northwest. There is a lot of all electric unregulated housing out there, usually, baseboard electric or cadet heaters, electric resistance water heaters. So, one thing that really helps with is the electrification or decarbonization strategy of these properties, there's usually enough capacity in the existing electrical service and distribution system that we don't have to do too many upgrades on that distribution panel to actually move to an all electric heat pump decarbonized future. That's really not the case in a lot of other regions in the country where natural gas is a lot more prominent, because in those places, the panels just aren't sized to pick up the load of a new heat pump water heater and a new heat pump, ductless heat pump heating system. So that's really an opportunity that we have here that, is a barrier that we don't face in a lot of other regions. The opportunities present at these properties are, basically everything, from, envelope, lighting, equipment, appliances, installation, air sealing. It's really, there are opportunities across the board in every part of the building. Because there's usually opportunities in every part of the building, we also want to make sure we're careful about doing those upgrades in the correct order. So we want to take care of the envelope and the lighting and the equipment before we move on to the HVAC system, to make sure that we're sizing that system correctly based on the new installation levels. So yeah, I think that's most of what I've seen, kind of what I had notes on. Definitely, the health and safety issues, wiring, loose exposed wiring, moisture and mold. Clearly in the Pacific Northwest, in this wet region, we see a lot of mildew and mold issues, which, can be greatly upgraded just by replacing a broken bathroom exhaust fan, and that really, that simple repair really improves somebody's quality of life. So, doing some really small, simple things can have really big impacts for these tenants.
Yeah.
This is Paula again. I have an idea on this because I've seen a lot of that type of housing in Denver, of all places, the outskirts, kind of Aurora area. And Denver's such a very diverse town. There's lots of ethnic communities of various kinds near their places of worship. So it's about the places of worship that I had an idea. If it's important to address health and safety issues that are not necessarily in those kind of landlords' radar, to deal with that because their low rents are more because they don't want to improve the place. I'm wondering if, similar to how we approach our legislators to help us with things, would you consider approaching the churches, the spiritual leadership, because churches are historically in service to their community, and they're also very often the most peaceful people, and so they really know how to deal with tough situations and bring people around. It's just a thought.
Cool.
Okay, so I think the next point that we're going to be talking about before we start our conversation is what would be the impact of those upgrades that Patrick just talked about, and how useful will that be to the communities in terms of we're talking about like health or wealth of those people. So I think the first point that I would emphasize is that health outcome that could really be a benefit for the community. And I would just give like two numbers that came out of a study by PSU a couple of years ago. One of them is that we heard Faith talking about 8 out of 10 people in those rental, like of the renters, live in unregulated low-income housing. In this area that I mentioned earlier, the Southwest Corridor, that study said it's actually 93% of people, of tenants in this area actually are living in unregulated low-income housing, which is quite higher than that number, and it gives you like an indication that certain areas are actually probably going to be struggling more. And then the other number that I want to give you is related to a study that was done by the city of Portland as they were preparing for the West Portland Town Center plan a couple of years ago. They had like a health equity assessment, And in one of the neighborhoods in that West Portland Town Center area, which is a very small geography, uh, they found that in a neighborhood like the West Portland Park neighborhood, life expectancy of people living in this area were 5 years less than other neighborhoods in the same town center. And this neighborhood is actually full of those unregulated affordable housing, one of the most diverse communities or areas in Southwest Portland. So that gives another indication of like improving the conditions of those properties would really impact the health of the people who are living there. I think also one other thing is improving the community resilience and energy equity. Uh, a lot of the people who are living in those properties, and we mentioned like earlier about people of color, low income people, those people have historically been excluded from all benefits that investments bring or developments bring to the communities. So just being mindful of that and providing the support and doing the upgrades, uh, that is part of what equity means, bringing those resources and energy efficient technologies to those properties. They will feel that they are included and they are really appreciated, they are valued. So that's another aspect of it. And then the other type of benefits is related to the economic benefit. uh, a lot of the communities that we work with, and again I will just connect it to what Patrick was saying about like those buildings are not really in the best condition, and a lot of them like having some insulation issues or like the structure in their like electric systems. A lot of the people that we talked to last year as part of this West Portland Town Center planning process, they were telling us that even during summertime they are paying a lot on electric bills. If they're not using actually the heating system, but somehow something is leaking or whatever, so their bills are still high. So improving that and like reducing the electric bills for those people, I think would be really very helpful. And they were telling us very clearly that I could use that money. Probably if I don't need to save it, but I could use it for other things that are important to me that I cannot actually buy because I'm paying extra or more money for energy bills. So that's a very important point or benefit that could result from doing the energy efficiency upgrades. And then I would say maybe the last point that I want to share, and then maybe Faith and Patrick can add, or anyone else as well, is that those buildings, when you do the energy efficiency upgrades, it's kind of like you're preparing them for maybe a next stage of adding renewable energy, which will be like even less expensive and less harmful to the community uh, and to the environment at large. So I think these are really some really good benefits that we are going to get. Of course, reducing the greenhouse gases also, and the air pollution again links to the health outcomes of this work. So I think those are like the benefits that I can see, like immediate benefits to the community that we can achieve by doing the energy efficiency upgrades. But again, we are talking about this. It's so challenging to achieve this work. And I think that's why we are having this discussion. So I'll just turn it maybe to Faith. So.
You just touched on one of the things I wanted to cover is just, there are greenhouse gas emission goals in our state, and this helps. Buildings are 40% creating the emissions that are warming our climate and creating all the severe weather, and addressing that. And we can. It's really like we know how to do it. So we could do that. And frankly, that's an economic issue as well. I mean, for our whole community, of course, but also for the people that just are living in those units. We don't want, for example, where there is gas, which is not as common, I would say mostly electric in these types of multifamily buildings, but where there is gas, we expect, people are going to get stranded on that system and have to pay a lot more as we electrify the rest of the economy. So, we're worried about that. And there's really, really deep economic benefits from even replacing electric resistance, right, with a ductless heat pumps kind of system or a ducted heat pump kind of system. So there's economic opportunity for the residents who live there. And I will just mention, and Tim will, I'm sure, reiterate this as well. You know, there's a benefit to landlords too of keeping people in housing, right, and not losing people. Like the story that you told, not having tenants in the summer is a huge economic impact. So while not everything about doing this program can be economically motivated, for sure, it doesn't always make sense for landlords, and we have to find ways to talk about it. That is one really big one, right? Keeping people in there, keeping units rented is a big economic benefit.
But I was glad Monad kind of touched on the renewables piece because, you know, every municipality and local, federal, state government has some kind of goal of reaching, you know, net zero by sometime mid-century. And kind of how I was saying earlier, the correct like order of steps to take to improve these properties is, you know, envelope, efficiency, equipment, and then it's solar, right? So you reduce the load as much as you can, install right-sized equipment that's electrically driven, and then you know, at that point, you know how much energy is left to create. And if you can create all that on site, then you can create, you know, safe, healthy, efficient, net zero, affordable housing. Another thing I kind of wanted to point out specifically is kind of what Faith and Monad were getting at with the community discussion, is that this type of housing is really very much at risk of immediate gentrification. There's no safeguards in place that, like, once a neighborhood changes, the rent can just go up, right? It's really at the edge of stability for communities. So, you know, through these programs, the basic story is that, like, you approach a landlord, you say, hey, we will help you improve this housing, but we need, you know, some commitment from you for affordability, continued affordability of this housing into the future. Now, figuring out exactly what kind of agreement from them makes sense for them and makes sense for the community, makes sense for the program, is kind of what we need to figure out. How many years do they have to agree to be affordable to, you know, accept the energy efficiency, you know, investments that we're making? Is that 2 years? Is that 5 years? Could we get 10 years out of them? You know? Yeah, so that's kind of a couple of points I wanted to.
Couple things for me. You know, to me right now, there's some great opportunity. There's federal funding coming this way. A little soapbox here, like the Justice 40 initiative. That's fantastic because that's a lot more funding than these programs have ever had. For example, like the LIHEAP program, 95% of those funds go to wintertime heating assistance. 5% goes to weatherization. Can you imagine if we weatherized a lot of those houses? And then that percentage starts to shift. But in the Justice 40 initiative, if you add up low income housing and you add up people with energy burdens that might be a little above the 80% median family income, and you add up folks that are frontline that are, you know, have environmental issues because of where they live, you're at about 40% of the population. So now the Justice 40 initiative, although a great idea, it's dollar for dollar if you're above that income level. I get $1, and then somebody that's low income is going to get $1 to do these kind of things. So should have been the other way around, maybe. But the other thing is I'm not telling you how to do this, but when we started to talk to that owner in the suburb, when you start talking their story, like when you say, if you lose people in the summertime and the place is empty for a couple of months, what's that costing you? That's costing you half of a ductless heat pump, probably. Or try a couple, right? Let's try a couple, and then you talk to those people, find out what their bills are. One of the things we do in the programs in Washington County is Even if the house is gas heated, we ask for an electric bill. It's a requirement because about half of the houses are electrically heated. And we've seen really good heat pumps, but they're wired wrong. The fourth wire isn't connected. It's acting as a furnace. We've seen, crazy old appliances that we nudge people to get an energy trust incentive and change out. And then the last thing is there's state law with healthy homes now, and the Oregon PUC recently said we can stack incentives now. So that's another opportunity along with this funding and some of the other, the raising of awareness of what's going on. So I'm excited to help more people, but there's a lot more that we need to do too. So.
I'm gonna sound, I don't mean to sound pessimistic, maybe just a little bit practical, but the reality is a lot of landlords are quite disconnected from the properties that they own. Been trying to find more information and to kind of characterize what you mentioned, like small multifamily in particular tends to be privately owned, maybe one or two properties. They might live out of state. They might live in a nicer part of Portland, but rent out places in Portland that have deferred maintenance and they never go. I lived in 2005, I moved to St. John's and I got an apartment for $435 a month.
Wow.
Really good deal. The first winter I had squirrels in my attic and they remained there the entire time I lived there, over a decade. So my landlord's response was that he didn't want to kick the squirrels out. And so that's, I think a lot of it has to do with the reality of living in a capitalist society. There is not enough housing to provide landlords with an incentive from a competitive standpoint to provide more equitable housing. I think with Portland is behind a lot of other cities when it comes to development. Seattle's kicking our butts right now when it comes to how much new housing they're building. I think that plays a part of this. I think, accessing, getting communities to feel empowered is one thing, but I try to be really mindful when we do our community work of recognizing the power dynamic that a lot of these tenants face. You mentioned the immigrant community in particular, I think there's a lot of vulnerability about what it takes to stand up. I don't mean to say that, I know not all property owners are going to be like what we think of, capitalist man, like monopoly man. But there does tend to be like a race dynamic. The history of redlining in Oregon is still felt very much in the so it's just a matter of fact of who tends to own this property and who has generational wealth. So those are just things that I think about when I try to develop a way for energy trusts to connect with the landlords. We found that a lot of times folks are very reactive instead of proactive. And so when we talk to folks, we want to have a good relationship with contractors who are the ones that landlords go to, because they're not going to the tenant and saying, how would you like me to fix this? They're calling their maintenance guy who's been working on all their properties, who knows the landlord just wants to do enough to make it a suit, to leave it, avoid it being condemned. And so really trying to sell the value of that. Hey, stacking incentives is a really good way, especially with programs like that pay the payment goes to the contractor directly. And then the landlord never has to see, or property manager doesn't even have to see the bill. Things like that can give them kind of that okay, either way, I'm not writing a check. Great, put it in there, and I'm not paying the utility bill. So that's one way thinking about barriers that just don't come across when you talk to the tenant. So I think, like I said, the relationship with the contractor is something that we've been really wanting to work on. Talking about these other values, trying to capture them within our own efficiency programs is really difficult. We have regulations around what's a non-energy benefit and how we quantify that. I think that we look at other things, and I volunteer at the county on sustainability and innovation, and thinking about things like emissions, other standards that improve quality of life. We talk about gas in rental households that don't have a choice, that they have a gas cooktop and may not have the best ventilation. Can we provide resources and education to tenants in the meantime while we're having these larger conversations around policy. I know I saw your notes. You said, there is a lot of work to do in policy. And I think that's educating lawmakers and people who are in power and represent us to have them understand what future we want and the future that we want for, the youth and those to come.
Thank you. That was a lot. That was awesome. So, and you definitely led us off to where I was hoping that we might go, which is so ideas. I'd love, like, let's just share what we have around how might we make these type of investments meaningful and attractive, right, in energy and water improvements to both owners and residents. And how do we do that in a way that doesn't encourage displacement or encourage raising rent?
I just want to know if there's anyone online. If not, maybe
Yeah.
get it a little bit more.
Do we, in the back, do we know if there's anyone still online? Yeah, okay, thanks. Right. Anyone have any ideas? Okay, we're gonna start passing it around, and we'd love to, an introduction too.
I'll pass it to you next. So my idea is that I think what I've seen in my short time in this ecosystem around affordable housing is that renters are well understood and they're one customer. But if you could divide those homeowners, or excuse me, property owners, managers into two distinct groups that I'm seeing, the good guys who are just maybe independently wealthy and they do it out of some value that is aligned with ours. And then you've got the property owners that would typically in the old days be called slumlords. Apologize for that, but simple word. So I think it's important to kind of make a profile of those two different customer groups and focus your efforts around that. And I'm really excited about policy making in this space. So I'd be curious to know, after these two gentlemen introduce themselves, who's leading the discussion that to educate our legislators. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Ferson Gonzalez, and I'm the director for housing at Centro Cultural. Just a couple of comments or questions that I had were like, what resources do we have available right now that could lead to, because we work with a bunch of landlords, I will say like at least 250 families are being rehoused under our program. So especially for like transitional housing or sheltering, there is a lot that needs to be done. They are living in conditions that obviously are not livable, but unfortunately that's what we have. So me as a director seeing it for 3 years now, like is like, what can we do to help these people to get a a place at least decent to live, because even it's transitional, they're gonna be there sometimes for 100 days, or we had some people that have been there for over a year because their barriers don't let them move on, because we need to work on making sure all those barriers are knocked down and making sure that they are ready to go, because a lot of times they are coming from living on the street for 10-13 years. They not even know how to use the stuff. They don't know, like we had cases where people put up their tents in the living room because that's the way they've been living for so many years. So us as a like community workers, what we're trying to do is or find that sweet line, where what's needed. Because at the end of the day, like they have a roof and they're comfortable, but we've been focusing on a lot of life skill training just because it's like it's essential for them, even how to use a machine. A lot of times like they put the dishwasher on and it goes for hours, and they don't know how much energy and water is being wasted there. So like kind of this finding out what resources are available and what like what can we tap on, like especially on this like other trainings that could happen with the participants, because it's not just our people, it's in general. A lot of people don't know, never had access to use a dishwasher machine. They don't know how to use their thermostat on
Yeah.
the heater, you know, like, so all those things do matter at the end of
Yeah.
the day, because if we have, let's say, 500 families that don't know how to use it, how are we gonna train or educate these people
Yeah.
on these elements that are so important? They're basic, but they don't know how to use it. So thank you very much.
Okay, good morning, Miguel Salgado. I am a housing case manager under person, Centro Cultural. Uh, Following what he was saying about like what resources do we have? Um, in my opinion, I mean, I've been fighting with him and the other directors too. Like, what we need is education, motivation for people. Following what he's saying about like some clients that we have, it took us about 2 or 3 months for one of them to actually sleep on the bed because he was sleeping on the floor. And that's when one of our coworkers came along as the life skills, and finally he was able to get on the bed and how to use stuff and wash his clothing and take a shower, and all that stuff.
Did you say the second thing was education and
Motivation.
motivation?
Motivation, because why I'm saying this, because we have those type of clients. Then we have the other type of clients where like they just needed like a little push, like probably they just recently lose their housing, and but now because they know that they can get like a rent, you know, for free, if you want to say it like that, they stop working because they're getting. I mean, they don't have to worry about paying rent. They don't have to worry about paying for utilities. How can we motivate him to keep going instead of like, okay, so we're gonna solve your problems, we're gonna do like all this like nice things into housing, talk to landlords, and so rent can be affordable, but if they're not doing anything to like help themselves, I mean, how good is it that we're gonna be doing all those things, work with landlords, do eco efficiency, everything, if they don't have the motivation to like live life to its full potential. So what I've been always fighting with everybody is like we need to attack the like their demons, meaning traumas, addictions, mental health. Because I mean, it's for us like I see I'm on the field all the time. It's easy for me to deal with landlords, go and like convince them, sell my program so they can house my clients. What happens in 1 2 2 months? They're getting evicted because of the same reasons that he mentioned. They don't know how to use anything. They don't know how to act in society. They break the rules every day, every single day, and we have to mediate. We have to be always talking to landlords, uh, like not to like evict them. So how, I mean, house them, housing them is not the hard part. Keeping them into housing is what's like driving me crazy. Trying to find solutions, like how to motivate them, how like be like I mean, I want to be taking a lot of training to like be the one telling them this is how you. I mean, this is life. I mean, this is your life. This is your kids. You have to take care of them. But then they see everything for free. They lose motivation. They're like, oh well, they'll take care of me. What about your kids? Are you gonna have your kids on the system like for the rest of their life too? So that's just something that I've been fighting with everybody, and I think we need resources to like educate and motivate people, like and us too. Like if we want to stay on the field, like we want to be fighting for them, we need the resources. We need the motivation. Like, why am I doing this? What I mean, what good is it if I'm housing like so many families, but then they cannot keep it? What am I doing? You know what I mean? So
Can you introduce yourself too?
I'm Fiona Bai. I'm a communications coordinator at Oregon Housing and Community
great.
Services.
Nice.
So
Oh, great.
thanks for
joining
having
us.
me.
Nice.
I really appreciate your, can I? Thank you. I really appreciate your comment on motivation. And I think it actually ties to something you mentioned also with the immigrant community, which ties to what you said, Mohamed. I think we tend to think about things from an educational perspective, which is a superiority complex, I think, in a sense, right? Whereas when we think about the immigrant communities, me being one of them, and I'm speaking from experience, when you move to North America, you do have an inferiority complex that comes with it. Just you're an immigrant. The constant environment around you tells you that we're giving you the opportunity to flourish here, right? So you kind of feel like you walk in with this gratefulness. I have to be grateful. And so I will have to shut up, even as someone who is an educated, wealthy female, right? So I think it's a really important element when we think about even connecting with, say, your idea on, places of worship and connecting with people to know what gives them the empowerment, the motivation to even speak up. Because, yes, I think what you're saying, Miguel, is like motivation around, like even getting out of the bed and supporting your children, but it goes like multi-layers. So just something like it's very nuanced, but really, I think, important to notice.
Multnomah County is doing a lot of work around climate justice planning and really intentional about how they're bringing in community. And it's been really great to see how they've brought in mothers and specifically like who are talking about how they've, they're not their children are first generation here. And they're motivated they want to learn more about climate and what does it mean to save energy? Because they want to make sure that that they move to this country so that their families could have a better life. And it's really been, for me, it's been moving to hear them speak about it because I don't have kids. I'm not going to have kids. So when people use that argument with me, I'm like, it's not, but I'm like, I mean, I have again, nieces and nephews and cousins and stuff like that. So I get that. And it's just been, so that's just some food for thought, is like thinking of like community climate, like why does it matter what I do? Having a standard for yourself and feeling empowered, knowing like the laws around what are your rights as a tenant, renters' rights, really complicated. We have resources for them. It's pretty limited. Community, I think, is it Community Action Tenant Alliance Tenants does like a lot of work to protect tenants who have issues with landlords. I think resources directing them to that and like connecting like these different policies around, okay, so we have this problem where you don't have heat in your home. I don't think that it should necessarily be on a tenant to go and tell them about, energy efficiency incentives. But I think that it's like I said, it does come back to community. The community is both the like people who live in the neighborhood who are also, they're the ones who the landlord wants to make sure, like if there's a problem, the city will come and condemn your apartment. So if your neighbors are filing complaints because your property is run down, you will lose your property. I'm not saying that like punitive measures should be the only form of motivation, but it comes back to that bigger picture of community. So in a community, like you mentioned, and is it Southwest Portland? Just thinking about what that looks like in a more holistic way to have a more sustainable future, that creates these conversations to say, okay, we want safer access to transit because we care about reducing carbon. Our carbon footprint as a community means that community members are also advocating for that, not just the feeling like the tenants who are living in this unregulated affordable housing have to do all of the work. So that's just a model I'd say like the climate justice planning work has been really great to see how we connect a lot of these things from like people trying to heal trauma through making the world, planning for a better place through some of it is policy. The city of Portland has introduced the HEART standards and working on creating requirements for comfortable climate indoors, and talking about what it means for folks to actually feel safe and secure in their rental properties. And so seeing more of that in the state, I think would be good.
I just had a couple of points I wanted to touch on. Number one, I kind of nerded out on this a little while ago when it comes to dishwashers and hand washing. And I know a lot of people who, aren't accustomed to using a dishwasher, lower income communities, immigrant communities, maybe, had just never used one before. There's this conception that like, oh, if I use the dishwasher, it's going to be really expensive and it's going to use all this water and electricity. So I did a bit of a dive in this, and one fact that kind of made it click for me is basically if you have at least 8 dishes to wash, it's more efficient to use the dishwasher than washing by hand, because it uses a very little amount of water. Most of the energy is going into the water heating, actually. And the water heating, you're basically using more hot water to wash 9 dishes hand washing than washing the same number of dishes in your dishwasher. And then another point I wanted to touch on, you kind of brought up capitalism earlier, and I think that directly ties into the motivation that you were mentioning, because, you know, when this family was living in their own home, working 3 jobs and just making enough to cover the rent and still going to a food pantry, they weren't seeing any value from their labor. They're like just getting by barely, you know. So, and now if they, you know, have a free place to live and they're not working and their needs are, you know, on the edge of being met, what's the point to work 3 jobs to be in the same situation, you know? And that's where I think preserving the affordability of this housing and reducing the utility bills in this housing puts more of their wages in their pocket for investing in their family, investing in their needs, and building something, you know, instead of just like, and they can do a little bit more than getting by, right? If we can lower those utility bills, that puts another dollar in their pocket. So
that's why I also mentioned education. You know, educate them, like, instead of having 3 jobs, have 1 job that's gonna provide for it, everything, instead of, you know, killing themselves all day, every week. So education, motivation, those are my 2 things.
So when you were talking about motivation, I'm listening to everybody. I always bring it down to the basics about motivation. I'm a businesswoman, and sometimes this can come off as a little harsh, but there's only 2 types of motivators: pleasure and pain. And if you can tie behavior to those, you get behavioral changes. There's a really good book out there called Don't Shoot the Dog. It's a quick read. It's by a behavioral trainer for dolphins and dogs and things. And the book is about how you apply that to people. So I recommend it to everybody, whether you have a dog or not.
Similar to what you said earlier, there's, you know, the landlord, the property owners that are there for profit only, and there's the good ones. What I've seen in the Energy Trust program is very effective, very good contractors. There are a few that love the rebate because they can increase their price, and then the rebate comes off of that. Very few, I'll be honest. What we could do in the case of possibly talking to an owner of unregulated housing, here's some improvements you could do, is find those good contractors that have a great story. They're selling their services every day. We went out and talked to contractors for 6 months when I first started we're working in the Energy Trust program, and we learned so much. You know, they're the ones, they're business people. They're trying to obviously increase their revenue or continue their revenue. When I got here, it was a very tough time. Some of these folks were making a nickel. They were basically just paying the bills. So that's what we did at that project in the suburbs. We actually took the contractor out there and says, yes, we know this is costly for 80 ductless heat pumps, but here's the benefits. So I think that helped. It took some time. Of course, it took his daughter to feel better in her unit, but finding those contractors that are doing good things for you, and if they tell a good story, and if they've got a good pitch, not a sales pitch, just a good pitch, you know, and if they're willing to go with you occasionally, that's an opportunity too.
Just in defense of sales, everything is sales. We're always persuading people to buy our ideas and things. So it's not a dirty 4-letter word.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I will just say, you know, we are at the end of time. I have so many questions. One is like there is this, perhaps it's a false dichotomy that we set up between motivating residents to find their power and willingness to talk, you know, to speak up and ask for what's needed and and what they need. And then also the idea of not creating an acrimonious relationship between landlords and tenants. And I feel pushed in all directions all the time on that conversation. So I would love more input from you on that, but we don't have time for that. And I also was hoping that we would like share what the resources that we know about that are out there for this type of housing right now. And I will just give you a list, and there's others at the table that can give you more of a list. But we can certainly, if you know of anybody that could possibly benefit, or if you're just curious, find us, because we can talk for a long time. Many of us at the table are associated with the Oregon Housing and Community Services program for doing energy upgrades in multifamily housing. There's a specific NOAA, unregulated housing, that is, offering, which provides free technical assistance. And that's the program that Patrick and I are engaged in. So that is an opportunity to really do total hand-holding from the front of the process to the back of the process. That's only in PG and PAC service territories. So it's statewide, but it's limited to those 80% of the state. There's energy trust incentives, so we can hear more about those. There's a Portland Clean Energy Fund program. Maybe some of you heard about it yesterday, but there's a program rolling out next year that will be for the city of Portland, $50 million going into this type of housing to do in-unit measures, which can be stacked with the RMEP, can be stacked with energy trust incentives. There are heat pump campaign from the Oregon Department of Energy available, and that's available statewide. So Tim can share more information about that. And then there's these big federal investments that are coming, that are flowing into the state. We're not yet fully sure how that's happening, but Oregon Department of Energy will be directing on how that's happening. And those are both rebates for buying equipment and actually whole home energy kind of efficiency upgrades as well. Those will be directed to both multifamily and single family. So a lot of resources coming into the state. I hope that we will braid them well so that there's not a lot of waste. We don't have a really successful track record in that, but we'll hope that we'll do good this time. And we hope that Tim, to your point earlier, we hope that it actually serves the people that most need it. Thank you all for playing with us and being in this small group conversation, and totally open to additional conversation when and where we find one another. Thank you. Great session. Any last ideas that you just want to make sure you throw out there?